a second time the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the National Disability Insurance Scheme Bill 2012. Mr Speaker, the core function of government is to provide support for the disadvantaged. Outside of defence and security for our country, there is a core responsibility of government to provide for the disadvantaged, including the profoundly disabled and their carers who sacrifice so much. And I would suggest perhaps that they are the highest priority among the disadvantaged. And yet, I must say, in my 8 years as a Member of Parliament, perhaps the most illuminating issue for me in my local electorate, the thing that surprised me most, was the observation over time of the extent of people in local communities who, in all sorts of ways, are profoundly disabled. And not only the people who have that disability, but in so many cases the carers. And for many of those people, it's almost a life sentence. I mean, to them, they make enormous sacrifice. Some of them, for their whole life, has been devoted to looking after a loved one who is profoundly disabled. And in many ways, because they lead such an all-consuming life with that problem and that responsibility, many of them are not well placed to be champions for that issue, for those areas of responsibility that the government's got. So we tend to get, as parliamentarians, representations, appropriate representations from people across the community dealing with all sorts of other disease issues, legitimate diseases, great concerns in the community, all sorts of other social issues. And in many cases, they are so well represented by champions, as they should be, often celebrities and others who've taken up the cause of any number of different well-known diseases and problems in our community. And as a consequence, there is a fair proportion of what available monies there are devoted to so many of those areas. But in many ways, the black spot, the black hole, the unseen one, and I've seen it also in particular with mental health because of the stigma. For the same reason, there aren't champions. But the profoundly disabled is even in a worse situation, in my view, in terms of their ability to grab the national attention, to get what is and should be a significant focus on dealing with their needs before we deal with many others, quite frankly. And this bill, this debate, this issue has progressively emerged in the last few years, and I think now quite properly there is a clear focus on it, and we need now to move forward and put in place in a very systematic, efficient, effective and compassionate way services that will meet the needs, particularly of the profoundly disabled. I think we have to really make sure that we draw this distinction, not in totality, but in terms of where the priority is. And I'll come back to that a little later in my comments. So this bill, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the first step to providing appropriate support through a National Disability Insurance Scheme, the NDIS. As the Leader of the Opposition and many of my colleagues have said, it is an idea whose time has come, and I agree. This is something that should be above politics, and the Coalition lends its unequivocal support to this bill. The Coalition has enthusiastically supported each milestone on the road to the NDIS. We have supported the initial work by the Productivity Commission. We've supported the $1 billion in the last budget. We've supported the 5 launch sites. We've supported the agreement between the Commonwealth and New South Wales for a full statewide rollout after the Hunter launch. and we support this legislation. The NDIS is a once-in-a-generation reform whose development will unfold over the life of 3 parliaments. It is complicated, it is comprehensive, it is expensive, enormously expensive, and it has many components, and it needs to be, as a piece of public policy, very properly considered and to carry the community with us in this exercise, because in many ways it will put pressure on other programs if we are to fund this. But again, government's about setting priorities, and as I said at the outset, if there is one on the social side as a core responsibility of government, it must be the highest priority, in my view, to look after the profoundly disabled. The Coalition maintains that the establishment of a joint parliamentary committee to oversee its implementation is not only appropriate, but it is essential. The track record of the Rudd-Gillard governments in regard to program implementations suggests it alone cannot be relied upon to implement the best NDIS possible. And given the complexity and the state nature of much of the services and all of the rest of it, it does need a multi-government approach to this, and I would say a multi-party at this level, so that there is something extending over several terms of office. We've got this bipartisan commitment and carriage of this process. This process requires proper and extensive consultation and attention to detail. A parliamentary committee would lock in all parties and provide a non-partisan environment where issues of design and eligibility could be worked through cooperatively. There should be no room for... This is not an issue which should go to party politics in any sense. It is a golden opportunity for this place to demonstrate that some issues can clearly be above party politics. There's not an ideological difference on this issue of looking after the profoundly disabled. It is regrettable that the government has rejected bipartisanship on many occasions in a bid to claim ownership. George Christensen has had a motion in the House to establish this committee for some time, and it has not been brought forward for a vote. Senator Fifield moved a similar motion to establish the Oversight Committee. Labor and the Greens combined in the Senate, sadly, to vote it down. The fact of the matter is that from the outset, every Australian government and opposition, state and federal, endorsed what the Productivity Commission proposed. It takes special skill for the Prime Minister to turn this into a political bun fight, and I hope that she will reconsider the approach that's been taken to date. Sustainably funding a full NDIS will be crucial, and the government, beyond the first $1 billion for the trials, has provided no insight into how this might be achieved. Otherwise, expectations in many ways will far exceed the ability of the taxpayer to support this assistance. We've got to be very careful, I think, that in the process of developing this, that there is a clear understanding in the community of what is involved in a financial sense, and this thing needs to be developed and carry the community with us. Even this $1 billion does not reconcile with the $3.9 billion the Productivity Commission said would be needed for the first stage. So already 1/4 of what was suggested by the Productivity Commission. So already, what does that mean? What does that mean for the proper rollout, design, preparation, planning and all the rest? It's totally unclear. An NDIS can be delivered within the timeframe recommended by the Productivity Commission, but by prudent government. It comes down to priorities and deciding what is important. It also comes down to clearly identifying who will be eligible, who will qualify for the NDIS support. And due to the policy process, sort of in ways on the run in the announcement of this support for this proposal, none of that thinking, no prior thought seemed to have been given, no discussions with the states, no idea of the reach and the cost. And we have now the seniors sort of concerned that at 65 they'll be cut off. All of these sorts of issues should not be emerging. They should have been given some thought before a formal announcement of the NDIS. And there is an issue here which needs to be remembered and considered. Expectations have already been raised because of this vagueness in the process to date and the lack of any definition of what was being considered when the announcement was made in the broad sense. We've got expectations of groups, I suspect well over 1 million or more, who think that many of their needs, often legitimate needs, will automatically be covered by this NDIS. Well, the profoundly disabled probably number in the 300,000 or 400,000. That is the priority. They must be the ones that get the detailed and important services and their carers. And those beyond, the expectations need to be managed, or otherwise we're going to have a very disgruntled community, lots of unnecessary political debate, disagreement, people who feel totally let down. It's unnecessary. This thing we need to carry the community with us in this process if this whole thing is to be properly accepted, implemented, and if it is to do what it must do. And we do need to be in a position where government can fund it, which goes back, and I won't dwell on this, but the whole substance of economic management and prudence, the $7 billion we're now paying in interest each year, $7 billion on debt, these things are relevant to issues like this. That could almost perhaps cover much of the Commonwealth contribution now, but of course it goes off in interest rates. We can only assume the government will make appropriate provision in the coming budget. The whole notion of the NDIS is to provide a ubiquitous level of support of those eligible wherever they live. As it stands, the level of support can vary depending on things such as the state you live in, the region you live in, whether your disability is congenital or acquired, whether a disability was acquired in the workplace or in a motor vehicle, and the list goes on. We need a new system based on need, not on rationing, with the entitlement to support resting with the individual. The NDIS is a person-centred and self-directed funding model. It is aligned to the objectives of empowering the individual, removing government from people's lives and reducing red tape. Very important principles in this design of this program. There can be no full NDIS without an intergovernmental agreement with each state and territory. And it was a welcome development when New South Wales Premier O'Farrell and the Prime Minister signed such an agreement in December for full statewide NDIS rollout after the Hunter Launch project. It's now up to the Prime Minister and the government to continue this constructive approach. Momentum for an NDIS has gathered over the past 5 years. Those with disabilities, their families and carers, and the organisations which support them have formed a loud and single voice. Much credit must go to them for bringing this important issue to the forefront of national political consideration. In my own electorate, can I just acknowledge organisations who provide enormous contribution to supporting people with disabilities, organisations such as Moira in Hampton East, led by very competent Warwick Kavanagh, Bailey House, an outstanding organisation, been in the community since 1951, providing a wide range of services. Bruce Selvin, the CEO there, is running just an outstanding and wonderful organisation. Similarly, of similar quality, Marriott House at McKinnon, with CEO Dan Romanis, provides a range of programs for adults with intellectual disabilities, including employment support. Other groups include Autism Victoria in Black Rock and Hampton, Care Choice at Elwood, Need Kids Support Group in Caulfield, Berrendale School, wonderful school at Hampton East, under the guidance of Paula Barnett. This is a group which you find, these sorts of groups you find in all electorates. There are people all over our community looking to support, but in many cases the services that they can access, disjointed, not available, inadequate, good in some places, not in others. These things must be addressed and hopefully will be addressed as we move forward with this very important project. Mr Deputy Speaker, we want the NDIS to be a success, a huge success. We want launch sites to be run smoothly. We stand ready to work with the government and all jurisdictions to make the NDIS a reality, to ensure that, in particular, the profoundly disabled and the carers who have given up so much, sacrificed so much, expect in so many cases little in return. Their demeanour just inspires me when I meet these people. We deserve to look after these people, and we will, if we get this bill in place properly.
Time has